When Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story premiered, it became a cultural phenomenon. It was grim, uncomfortable, and often horrifying, yet it felt focused and anchored in the truth. Dahmer, after all, truly fit the definition of a monster, a prolific serial killer whose crimes forced society to look at the darker corners of humanity. The follow-up, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, took a slightly different approach, less about a traditional monster and more about a media frenzy, family dysfunction, and the blurred line between victim and villain. It was well made, but perhaps stretched the series' title concept. Now comes the third entry, Monster, the Ed Gein Story, and unfortunately it's at the point where this anthology for many officially jumps the shark. To understand why this show feels so divisive, we need to revisit who Ed Gein really was. Born in 1906 in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Gein was a reclusive son of an abusive alcoholic father and an overbearing, deeply religious mother, Augusta Gein, a woman who instilled in him the belief that all women were sinful and unclean. After her death, Gein descended into madness. When police investigated his farmhouse in 1957, what they found shocked the world. Furniture made from human bones and skin, masks crafted from women's faces, skulls used as bowls, and the remains of two confirmed murder victims, Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan. Gein also confessed to exhuming graves to use body parts for his grotesque projects. Though he killed only 2 people, his crimes became the blueprint for some of cinema's most terrifying characters, namely Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of course Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. That blend of truth and myth has long fascinated filmmakers, and it's here that Monster the Ed Gein Story loses its way. Created under the Ryan Murphy's Monster banner for Netflix, this third season attempts to explore both Ed Gein's psychology and his cultural legacy. It stars Charlie Hunnam as Ed Gein, a bold, unexpected casting choice, with Laura Metcalf as the domineering mother Augusta and Suzanne Sun as Adeline Watkins, the supposed lover of Ed Gein in real life, although her story has been grossly over-dramatized. The show's production design is impeccable. The bleak Wisconsin farmlands, the eerie farmhouse interiors, and the 1950s atmosphere are rendered in haunting detail. The cinematography drenches every frame in muted browns and greys, evoking the isolation of Gein's twisted world. But where the first Monster entry felt like a chilling but faithful retelling, this one indulges in excess. Instead of a restrained character study, the Ed Gein story spirals into a fever of dreams of half-truths, imagined encounters and symbolic hallucinations, a creative decision that undermines both its realism and its true horror of what this man really did. The show begins fairly close to the truth, depicting Ed's childhood under the iron rule of Augusta, his reclusive adulthood, and his obsession with his deceased mother. But as it progresses, fact gives way to fiction at a startling rate. In later episode, Gein is shown conversing with real historical figures, including Christine Jorgensen, the first person to undergo gender-reaffirming surgery, and even Ilse Koch, the Nazi war criminal infamously accused of making lampshades from human skin. While these scenes are clearly meant to represent Gein's delusions, the series never fully clarifies that boundary. It blurs fantasy and reality so freely that it feels like it's rewriting history rather than dramatizing it. It even goes further in the final episode. In an almost surreal montage, we see Gein supposedly influencing or interacting with other infamous murderers like Richard Speck, Jerry Brudos, and even in helping in the capturing of Ted Bundy, the last of which is complete fabrication. There's a bizarre subplot where Gein's supposed insights are used to catch Bundy, something that of course never happened, and that is he was almost seen as a poster child for these other infamous serial killers. Although Gein himself is not actually really a serial killer, in the truest sense of the word. By the finale, Monster isn't just about Ed Gein anymore. It's become his cultural afterlife, his supposed influence on film, media, and other killers. While that's an interesting concept, the execution collapses under its own ambition. Perhaps the most troubling element of Monster the Ed Gein Story is the way it frames its subject. Charlie Hunnam's performance is genuinely impressive, haunting, layered, and even pitiable at times. But the show leans too far into humanizing Gein, portraying him as a tragic, misunderstood soul instead of a deeply disturbed murderer that he was. His mental illness, schizophrenia, and history of abuse are important parts of the story, but here they are used almost to justify sympathy rather than understanding. The narrative begins to frame Gein as almost a martyr, someone victimized by his own environment, by his mother, even by society. That kind of framing can be deeply uncomfortable when the victims, real women whose lives were stolen, become footnotes to the killer's psychology. This has always been a danger in true crime storytelling. We glamorize the monster and forget those who he destroyed. Where Dahmer succeeded, despite its controversies, was in grounding the story in its victims, their lives, their voices, their families' pain. Ed Gein loses that grounding almost entirely. Now look, if there's one area where the show shines, it's in its performances. Charlie Hunnam's transformation into Ed Gein is startling. His portrayal switches between the soft-spoken, almost childlike farmer and the unhinged killer with chilling precision. The only misstep may be the high-pitched vocal choice, which feels more theatrical than necessary. Laura Metcalf as Augusta Gein delivers one of the show's stand-up performances. She's terrifying, a cold fire and brimstone matriarch who warps her son's mind through years of religious guilt and control. Her scenes are claustrophobic, almost gothic in tone, and give the show its most powerful moments. Susanna Sun's Adeline Watkins, however, represents the show's worst fictional excess. Her arc, from sweet girl to darkly complicit partner, is entirely invented, and while her performance is strong, the character's evolution feels implausible and melodramatic. It's emblematic of the show's central problem: style over substance, shock over truth. Some interesting trivia. Monster the Ed Gein Story was filmed primarily in Manitoba, Canada, standing in for rural Wisconsin. The production reportedly used over 70 practical sets, including full reconstructions of Gein's farmhouse interior based on police photographs from 1957. Ryan Murphy and co-creator Ian Brennan described the season as an exploration of America's obsession with its monsters, not a biopic, a key reason why the show takes such creative liberties. Charlie Hunnam prepared for the role by studying actual police reports and medical transcripts from Gein's time at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. The costume department used authentic 1950s techniques for the period, clothing down to hand-stitched collars and buttons. And while the craftsmanship is impressive, it only serves to highlight how far the writing strays from the historical grounding. One intriguing aspect of the season is how it tries, albeit clumsily, to comment on the society's fascination with killers. The show constantly references Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the Silence of the Lambs, suggesting that Ed Gein's crimes birthed a cultural mythology that continues to this day. There's truth to that. Gein's gruesome acts did inspire an entire horror subgenre. Yet in Monster, this theme becomes muddled, more of a meta-commentary than a coherent narrative. It wants to condemn society's obsession while also indulging in it. It's a tricky balance. The Ed Gein Story, though, fails to maintain it. The show becomes the very thing it claims to critique: exploitation, fascinated with its killer and detached from the real-world consequences of his actions. In the end, Monster the Ed Gein Story is a beautifully made, superbly acted, but deeply misguided entry into the anthology. It starts off with a powerful premise that ends in indulgent chaos, a series so fixated on symbolism and artistic flourish that it forgets its moral compass. Yes, the acting is excellent. Yes, the production design is stunning, but the writing crosses too many lines, mixing fact with fiction until the result feels neither truthful nor respectful. As a psychological study, it's inconsistent. As a historical piece, it's inaccurate, and as a viewing experience, it's frustratingly self-indulgent. This series could have worked as a tight, focused 4 or 5 episode run exploring the real Ed Gein, his psychology, his crimes, and the cultural impact that followed. Instead, it sprawls into an 8 episode confusing fantasy with unnecessary sensationalism. Monster, the Ed Gein Story, earns a disappointing 5 out of 10. A visually well-acted misfire that mistakes excess for insight and ultimately forgets the difference between understanding a monster and glorifying one. So what did you think of the Ed Gein Story? Please let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives. I'll see you in the next one.